If there is no wind, row. Latin proverb. 4. The fairness trap. When psychologist M. Scott Peck begins his book, The Road Less Traveled, with the words, "Life is difficult," what he is getting at is life isn't fair. Many people never learn that fact. Instead of acknowledging it and moving on, they expand their energy trying to find fairness. They say to themselves, "I shouldn't have to be the one to do this." Dick Butler explains on this idea. Life isn't fair. It isn't going to be fair. Stop sniveling and whining and go out and make it happen for you. Wishing that a risk wasn't yours to take won't make it any easier. In fact, it might make it harder. Your attitude about it is your choice. 5. The timing trap. Don Marquis, the famous writer and humorist, was known to be a champion procrastinator. A friend who knew of this tendency in Marquis asked him how he ever got his day's work done. "That's simple," said Marquis. "I just pretend that it's yesterday's." Some people tend to think that there's a perfect time to do everything, and this isn't it. So they wait. But Jim Stovall advises, don't wait for all the lights to be green before you leave the house. If you wait for perfect timing, you'll wait forever. And the more you wait, the more tired you'll get. William James wisely declared, "There is nothing so fatiguing as the eternal hanging on of an uncompleted task." Don't use timing as an excuse to procrastinate. 6. The inspiration trap. Someone once said, "You don't have to be great to start, but you have to start to be great." Many people want to wait for inspiration before they are willing to step out and take a risk. I find that's especially true of people with an artistic bent. But as playwright Oscar Wilde said when he was asked the difference between a professional writer and an amateur writer, the difference is that the amateur writes when he feels like it and the professional writes regardless. When it comes to moving forward, Bill Glass gives this advice. When you get an insight or an inspiration, do something about it in 24 hours, or the odds are against you ever acting on it. Are you taking enough risks? As you examine the way you live, consider whether you are taking enough risks. Not senseless ones, but intelligent ones. Even if you don't fall into one of the 6 traps I just reviewed, you may still be playing it too safe. How can you tell? By looking at your mistakes. Fletcher L. Byron says, "Make sure you generate a reasonable number of mistakes. I know that comes naturally to some people, but too many executives are so afraid of error that they rigidify their organization with checks and counter-checks, discourage innovation, and, in the end, so structure themselves that they will miss the kind of offbeat opportunity that can send a company skyrocketing. So take a look at your record, and if you can come to the end of a year and see that you haven't made any mistakes, then I say, brother, you just haven't tried everything you should have tried." If you are succeeding in everything that you do, then you're probably not pushing yourself hard enough, and that means you're not taking enough risks. Another kind of risk-taking. You may have trouble relating to the great explorers and adventurers from history, such as Amelia Earhart. The risks those people took may seem too different from your life situation. If so, you need to know about the life of someone whose quiet willingness to risk may seem more like your own. His name was Joseph Listener. He was a second-generation physician born in England in 1827. Back in the days when he began practicing medicine, surgery was a painful and grisly affair. If you had the misfortune of being injured and requiring surgery in the mid-1800s, here's what you could have expected. You would have been taken to a hospital's surgical theater, a building that was separate from the main hospital to prevent the regular patients from becoming upset by the screaming. Anesthesia had not yet been discovered. You would have been strapped to a table that looked a lot like the one in your kitchen, under which sat a tub of sand, positioned to catch blood. Your surgery would have been performed by a physician or barber, likely surrounded by a group of observers and assistants. All of them would be dressed in the regular street clothes they wore throughout the course of the day while traveling around town and treating patients. The instruments the doctor used would have been pulled from a nearby drawer where they had been placed, unwashed, after the previous surgery. And if your surgeon needed his hands free while working on you, he might have held the surgical knife between his teeth. Your chances of surviving the surgery would be a little better than 50%. If you had the misfortune of having your operation in a military hospital, your chances of surviving would go down to about 10%. Of the surgery during that era, one contemporary doctor wrote, "A man laid on the operating table in one of our surgical hospitals is exposed to more chances of death than the English soldier on the field of Waterloo." Determined to make a difference. Like the other surgeons of his time, Lister was distressed by the death rate of his patients, but he was ignorant of the cause. However, he was determined to discover a way to save more of his patients. Lister's first breakthrough came after he was given some writings by his friend, Thomas Anderson, a chemistry professor. The papers were written by scientist Louis Pasteur. In them, the French scientist stated his opinion that gangrene was caused not by air, but by bacteria and germs present in air. Lister thought those ideas were remarkable, and he theorized that if the dangerous microbes could be eliminated, his patients would have a better chance of avoiding gangrene, blood poisoning, and the other infections that often killed them. Innovation makes him an outcast. Because of what we know today about germs and infection, Lister's ideas seem to be common sense. But his belief was radical in those days, even among members of the medical community. And when Lister, who was working at a hospital in Edinburgh, presented his beliefs to the senior surgeons, he was taunted, ridiculed, and rejected. Each day as he made his rounds, his colleagues insulted and criticized him mercilessly. He was an outcast. Despite the rejection of his peers and an inherently gentle nature, Lister refused to back down. He continued his work on the problem, but did his research at home. For a long time, he and his wife worked in a laboratory they created in their kitchen. The key, he believed, was to find a substance that would be capable of killing the microbes. Lister finally settled on carbolic acid, a substance used to clean the sewage system in the city of Carlisle. His preliminary research done, he was ready to test his theory, but that would require another risk, one greater than rejection by his peers. He would have to experiment with carbolic acid on a living patient, not knowing whether it would kill him. A greater risk. Lister determined to wait until he found the right person. It would require someone who faced almost certain death. He found his patient on August 12, 1965. An 11-year-old boy who had been run over by a cart was brought into the hospital. His leg had been so badly damaged that the broken bones had come through the skin, and his injury was more than 8 hours old. He was the kind of patient who usually didn't survive. Lister used carbolic acid to clean the wound, his instruments, and anything that came into contact with the patient. He also dressed the wound with bandages soaked in the substance. Then he waited. 1 day, 2 days, 3 days, then 4 days passed. To his joy, after 4 days there were no signs of fever or blood poisoning. After 6 weeks, the boy was able to walk again. Amid heavy criticism, Lister used carbolic acid in all of his procedures. During 1865 and 1866, he treated 11 patients with compound fractures, and none of his patients contracted infections. As he continued new procedures, he did research to improve his method, finding additional antiseptic substances that worked even better. Break. Hello, everyone who is reading this book. Please go ahead and click subscribe below. We are trying to get 1,000 subscribers by July 4th. End break. The result of risk. In 1867, Lister published his findings, and still the medical profession had ridiculed him. For more than a decade, he communicated his findings and encouraged other doctors to adopt his practices. Finally, in 1881, 16 years after his first success with a patient, his peers at the International Medical Congress held in London recognized his advances. They called his work perhaps the greatest advance that surgery had ever made. In 1883, he was knighted. In 1897, he was made a baron. Today, if you've had any kind of surgery, as I have, you owe Dr. Joseph Lister a debt of gratitude. His risk secured our safety. Lister's risks may not look as flashy as those taken by someone like Amelia Earhart, but that doesn't matter. What he did brought great personal achievement to him and lasting benefits to others. He wasn't content with success as a doctor. He attempted something more difficult and riskier. That's what matters. You risk because you have something of value that you want to achieve. That's just another part of failing forward. Your 11th step to failing forward. If you do succeed, try something harder. The willingness to take greater risks is a major key to achieving success, and you may be surprised that it can solve two very different kinds of problems. First, if you've been hitting all the goals you set for yourself, then you need to increase your willingness to take chances. The road to the next level is always uphill. so you can't coast there. Conversely, if you find yourself in a place where it seems that you don't achieve many of your goals, you may be playing it too safe. Once again, the answer is a willingness to take greater risks. It's ironic that opposite ends of the spectrum come together in the area of risk. Think about the next goal plan ahead of you. Write down your plan for reaching it. Then, go over that plan to see whether you have included enough risks. If not, find parts of that process where you can push the envelope, take more chances, and increase your opportunity for success. Steps to failing forward. 1. Realize that there is one major difference between average people and achieving people. 2. Learn a new definition of failure. 3. Remove the you from failure. 4. Take action to reduce your fear. 5. Change your response to failure by accepting responsibility. 6. Don't let the failure from outside of you get inside of you. 7. Say goodbye to yesterday. 8. Change yourself and the world changes. 9. Get over yourself and start giving of yourself. 10. Find the benefit in every bad experience. 11. If at first you do succeed, try something harder. 12. Make failure your best friend. The things which hurt instruct. Benjamin Franklin. The idea that you can make failure your best friend may seem odd to you, but the truth of the matter is that failure is either your friend or your enemy, and you are the one who chooses which it is. If you play a dergie every time you fail, then failure will remain your enemy. But if you determine to learn from your failures, then you will actually benefit from them. And that makes failure your friend. If you repeatedly use your failures as springboards to success, then failure can become your best friend. Let me show you what I mean. Embracing tragedy. How would you feel about an incident that cost you your nose, half your right arm, and all the fingers on your left hand? I'm guessing that you wouldn't have positive feelings. But that's what happened to Dr. Beck Weathers, and he sees that his loss as the defining event in his life, the event that turned everything around for him. Would I like to have my hand back? He said in an interview on CBS Evening News. Sure. Would I like to have my hands back enough to go back to who I was? No. What would cause a man willingly to embrace such a drastic disability? The answer could be found on Mount Everest. You see, Beck Weathers was one of the people on that peak during the now famous incident in 1996 when a blizzard cost 12 people their lives. No ordinary mountaintop experience. Weathers was 49 years old when he ascended Everest. At that point, he had been a mountain climber for 10 years, and it consumed him. He acknowledges, I regret the time taken away from my family, from my wife and 2 children. There's a large dose of selfishness involved in such an activity. I realize I was defining myself by climbing and not dealing with the rest of my life. It's an excessive goal and it never ends. You get about one day of happiness and then you're planning your next trip. Weathers always spent a lot of time in preparation for his next trip. Before Everest, he had scaled 6 of the 7 summits, the highest mountains on the continents, and for each climb he underwent a grueling training regimen. For the Everest climb, Weathers signed on with an expedition led by New Zealander Rob Hall. Before the team got to the high camp, at 26,000 feet, Weathers was doing fine, despite the difficult conditions and the bitter cold, at 1/3 of the oxygen present at sea level. But as he ascended the peak on May 10th, Weathers realized he was in trouble. Before some years ago, he had undergone radial keratotomy surgery to correct his vision. As he went up the mountain, the altitude caused the lenses in his eyes to flatten out, and that made him blind. Left for dead. At the time, the wisest decision seemed to be for Weathers to wait where he was, then rejoin the crew as they came back down from the summit. But Weathers' disappointment was soon overshadowed by nightmarish weather conditions. A freak blizzard rapidly enveloped the mountain, dropping the temperature to about 50 degrees below zero and increasing winds to 70 miles per hour. The storm made everyone scramble for survival. As that happened, Weathers was left on the mountain. Hours passed, and he lapsed into a hypothermic coma. Fellow climbers searched for Weathers for hours, and early in the morning on May 11th, they found him. He was covered in ice and barely breathing. They knew he would die, so they left him where he was and returned to camp, and radioed to his wife that he was dead. No person had ever come out of a hypothermic coma and survived, except Beck Weathers. Somehow he revived, got up, found his way, and staggered back into camp. His jacket was open, and his face was black beyond recognition with frostbite, and his exposed right arm was marble white and frozen upright in front of him. Resurrection. Even after his miraculous return to camp, nobody thought Weathers would survive, but he kept pulling through. Back in home in Dallas, he received medical attention. He underwent 10 surgeries. They amputated the fingers on his left hand, amputated his right arm near the elbow, and reconstructed new nose using tissue from the other parts of his body. Through it all, Weathers went through a radical learning experience. He believes he traded his hands for something more valuable. Lessons about himself, his values, and his life. He admits, "I'm probably a much happier person now, having gone through what I'd gone through. I have a different set of priorities. You never know who you are and what you are until you've really been tested. You can gain a whole lot from having failure kicked up from around your ears than success could ever teach you." Break. All right, guys, gals, and everybody in between, go ahead and like my Facebook page at www.facebook.com/MidSouthChasing. And don't forget to subscribe to the YouTube channel by clicking subscribe below. End break.
Beck-Weather's attitude reflected more than just gratitude for surviving a tragedy that could have killed him. He displays a teachability that has allowed him to change his life for the better. He has failed forward by making hardship his best friend. It's a mindset. Fortunately, you don't have to be left for dead on top of the world's highest mountains to become teachable and learn how to make failure your friend. You can do it from the safety of your own home. All it requires is the right attitude. Your attitude towards failure determines your altitude after failure. Some people never understand that. For example, John H. Holliday, the founder and editor of Indianapolis News, stormed out of his office one day in search of the person who had spelled height as height. When a worker checked the original copy and explained that Holliday himself had been the one who did it, the editor's response was, "Well, if that's the way I spelled it, that has to be right." The paper misspelled the word his way for the next 30 years. As Louis Armstrong insignificantly quiped, there are some people that if they don't know, you can't teach them. Teachability is an attitude, a mindset that says, no matter how much I know, I can learn from this situation. That kind of thinking can help you turn adversity into advantage. It can make you a winner during the most difficult circumstances. Sidney Harris sums up the elements of a teachable mindset. A winner knows how much he still has to learn, even when he is considered an expert by others. A loser wants to be considered an expert by others before he has learned enough to know how little he knows. Business author Jeff Zablowski writes, "Contrary to popular belief, I consider failure a necessity in business. If you're not failing at least 5 times a day, you're probably not doing enough. The more you fail, the more you fail, the more you learn. The more you learn, the more you do, the better you get." The operative word here is learn. If you repeat the same mistake 2 or 3 times, you're not learning from it. You must learn from your own mistakes and from the mistakes of others before you. The ability to learn from mistakes is not just value, it is business. How to learn from your failures and mistakes. William Bolfleo distinguishes between a sensible person and a foolish one. The most important thing in life is not to capitalize on gains. Any fool can do that. The really important thing is to profit from your losses. That requires intelligence and makes the difference between a man of sense and a fool. Your attitude towards failure determines your altitude after failure. But in all aspects of life, if you live to learn, then you will really learn to live. How to learn from your failures and mistakes. William Bolfleo distinguishes between a sensible person and a foolish one. The most important thing in life is not to capitalize on our gains. Any fool can do that. The really important thing is to profit from your losses. That requires intelligence. And it makes the difference between a man of sense. That makes the difference between a man of sense and a fool. Anyone can make a friend failure by maintaining a teachable attitude and using a strategy for learning from failure. To learn losses to profits, ask the following question every time you face adversity. What caused the failure? The situation, someone else, or yourself? You cannot find out what you can do unless you do all you can to find out what went wrong. So that's where you need to start. If you no longer personalize failure, as I suggested in Chapter 3, then it becomes easier to sort things out. A winner knows how much he still has to learn, even when he or she is considered an expert by others. The loser wants to be considered an expert by others before he has learned enough to know how little he knows. Sidney Harris. Where did things break down? Where were you in a no-win situation? Did another person create the problem? Did you make a mistake? When Beck Weathers examined the Mount Everest experience after the fact, he determined he made mistakes that led to the failure. He explained, when you're up that far, you get high altitude stupid. Always begin the learning process by trying to identify the cause of a problem. Was what happened truly a failure? Or did I really just fall short? You need to determine if what happened was really a failure. What you think is your fault may have been an attempt to fulfill unrealistic expectations. It doesn't matter whether you place them on yourself or someone else does. If a goal is unrealistic and you miss it, that's not failure. To give you a better perspective on this, let me tell you a story that President Reagan told before he left office. It's about the Three Musketeers, author Alexandre Dumas. The novelist and friend had a heated argument. One challenged each other to a duel. Both Dumas and his friend were expert marksmen. They feared that the both proceed with the duel, both would die. So they determined to draw straws to determine which of them would shoot himself. Dumas picked the short straw. With a sigh, he picked up his pistol, walked into the library, and closed the door, leaving behind him a group of worried friends. After a few moments, a loud report echoed from a pistol shot in the library. His friends immediately charged into the room, and there stood Dumas, and the pistol still smoking in his hand. An amazing thing just happened, said Dumas. I missed. As you examine your problems, don't try to be like Dumas. Don't allow an unrealistic expectation to kill you. A realist is an idealist who has gone through the fire and has been purified. A skeptic is an idealist who has gone through the fire and has been burned. Warren Wiersbe. 3. What successes are contained in the failure? An old saying states, the gem cannot be polished without friction, nor the man without his trials. No matter what kind of failure you experience, there is always a potential jewel of success contained in it. Sometimes it may be difficult to find, but you can discover it if you're willing to look for it. My friend Warren Wiersbe says, a realist is an idealist who has gone through the fire and has been purified. A skeptic is an idealist who has gone through the fire and been burned. Don't let the fire of adversity make you a skeptic. Allow it to purify you. 4. What can I learn from what happened? Adversity is the first path to truth. Lord Byron. I enjoy reading the comic strip Peanuts by Charles Schulz. And one of my favorites, Charlie Brown, is at the beach building a beautiful sandcastle. And as he stands back to admire his work, it is suddenly consumed by a huge wave. Looking at the sudden smooth sand mound that he had been his creation a moment before, he says, there must be a lesson here, but I don't know what it is. That's why many people approach adversity. They are so consumed by the events that they become bewildered and miss the whole learning experience. But there is a way to learn from failures and mistakes. Poet Lord Byron was right when he stated, adversity is the path to truth. Restaurateur Wolfgang Puck says, I learned more from the one restaurant that didn't work, from the ones that were successes. And success is something he knows a lot about. He owns 5 critically acclaimed successes restaurants in California: Spago, Chinois, Arnman, Postrio, the Eureka Brewery, and Granita. He also opened restaurants in Chicago, Los Angeles, and Tokyo. It is difficult to give general guidelines about how to learn from mistakes because every situation is different. But if you maintain a teachable attitude as you approach the process and try to learn everything you can about what you could do differently, will you improve yourself? When a person has the right mindset, every obstacle introduces him to himself or her to herself. 5. Am I grateful for the experience? One way to teach a teachable mindset is to cultivate an attitude of gratitude. And that's possible even in the face of a huge disappointment. For example, American sprinter Eddie Hart missed a preliminary heat for 100-meter sprint in 1972, Olympics in Munich. As a result, he lost the chance to win the individual gold medal. But his perspective on the experience was good. He said, everything you pursue won't always attain, but that's probably the most important lesson I learned from missing that race. There are times when you may not get the raise you want, the job you want, and you have to learn with your defeats. Athletics are valuable because they're all about winning and losing. Before you can actually be a good winner, you have to learn how to lose. Hart was grateful for the medal he received as a member of the relay and for the lesson it taught him about living with defeats. As you come away from a failure, try to cultivate a similar sense of gratitude. 6. How can I turn this into a success? Author William Marston writes, if there is any single factor that makes success in living, it is the ability to draw dividends from defeat. Every success I know has been reached because the person was able to analyze defeat and actually profit from it in the next undertaking. Determining what went wrong in a situation has value, but taking the analysis is another step, and figuring out how to use it as your benefit is the real difference maker when it comes to failing forward. Sometimes the benefit comes from learning something that will help you avoid similar mistakes in the future. Other times, it is a serendipitous activity, such as Edison's phonograph or Schonbein's sparkless gunpowder. If you're willing to try, you can often salvage something of value from any disaster. If there is any single factor that makes for success in living, it is the ability to draw dividends from defeat. William Marston. 7. Who can help me with this issue? People say there are two kinds of learning: experience, which is gained from your own mistakes, and wisdom, which is learned from the mistakes of others. I recommend that you learn from the mistakes of others as much as possible. Learning from your failures is easier with the help of a wise counselor. After making huge blunders, I've asked many people for advice. My dad, Jay Hayford, Elmer Towns, my wife Margaret, who is always willing to share her perspective of my blunders with me. Willing to seek advice from the right person is important. I heard a story about a recent newly appointed public servant who is setting himself up, and his new predecessor had left him 3 envelopes with instructions that they should be opened only in the time of distress. Before long, the man was in trouble with the press, so he decided to open the first envelope. The note said, "Blame your predecessor." So that's what he did. For a while, things went smoothly. But a few months later, he was in trouble again, so he opened the second envelope. The note said, "Reorganize." So that's what he did. That brought him more time, but because he never really resolved any of the issues that were causing him the problems, he ended up in trouble again, and this time it was even greater than before. In desperation, he opened the last envelope. The note inside read, "Perhaps 3 envelopes. Seek advice, but make sure it's from someone who has successfully handled his or her failures." Where do I go from here? 8. Once you've done all the thinking, you've got to figure out what to do. In their book, Everyone's a Coach, John Shula and Glenn Banchard state, learning is defined as the change in behavior. You haven't learned a thing until you can take action and use it. My own mountain to climb. When you are able to learn from any bad experience and thereby turn it into a good experience, you make a major transition in life. For years, I've taught something that I think gives useful insight on the subject of change. People change when they hurt enough that they have to, learn enough that they want to, and receive enough that they are able to. I learned the truth of that statement on a whole new level on December 8th, 1988. When at my company Christmas party, I felt an excruciating pain in my chest. I went down for the count. I suffered a serious heart attack. By the way, when it's a mild heart attack, it's when it's yours. A serious heart attack is when it's mine. Honestly, though, I thought I wasn't going to make it that night. And if my doctors told me that later I did the experience 4 years ago, it would have killed me. Cardiologists didn't possess that technology until that saved my life very recently. What I've gained. My heart attack was a painful and surprising experience, but I feel that God was very good to me in that process. Several excellent physicians rallied around me and made it possible for me not only to survive, but avoid any permanent heart damage. And I've learned a lot from it. For example, learning is defined as a change in behavior. You haven't learned a thing until you can take action and use it. Don Shula and Ken Blanchard. When it comes to telling the important people in your life how much you love them, you never can do it enough. I believe my work on earth is not yet finished, and God has spared me so that I can complete it. I must change my living habits for the sake of my health, the quality of my life, and the impact I desire to make in the future. My cardiologist, Dr. Marshall, told me that men who survive an early heart attack and learn from it live longer and healthier lives than those who never suffer a heart attack. I am determined to learn from the experience. I changed my diet. Don't let your learning lead to knowledge. Let your learning lead to action. Jim Rohn. I exercise every day and strive to live a more balanced life. Mark Twain's comment was true. The only way to keep your health is to eat what you don't want, drink what you don't like, and do what you'd rather not. I have to admit that it's simple, but I'm persevering. As I write this, it's been over a year since the heart attack, and I have not cheated on my diet or exercise program, and I won't. The changes I've made are permanent. I've taken heart to Jim Rohn's comment. Don't let your learning lead to knowledge, but let your learning lead to action. I believe the action I'm taking now will enable me to enjoy my wife, children, and future grandchildren, and it will allow me to continue my mission for decades that I would have otherwise missed. You don't need to suffer a heart attack or be caught in a blizzard on Mount Everest to make failure your best friend. All you have to do is maintain a teachable heart and be eager to learn every time you fail. Failing forward. Your 12th step to failing forward. Learn from a bad experience and make it a good experience. Analyze a recent failure using the questions outlined in the chapter. 1. What caused the failure? The situation, someone else, or was it myself? 2. Why was what happened truly a failure? Or did I just fall short? 3. What successes are contained in the failure? 4. What can I learn from what happened? 5. Am I grateful for the experience? 6. How can I turn this into a success? 7. Who can help me with this issue? 8. Where do I go from here? Take the time to write down your conclusions, what you learned from your analysis, and any action you need to take to make your failure into a success. Share your observations with a trusted advisor who can help you determine if your conclusions are on target. Steps to failing forward. Realize there is one major difference between average people and achieving people. 2. Learn a new definition of failure. 3. Remove the you from failure. 4. Take action and reduce your fear. 5. Change your response to failure by accepting responsibility. 6. Don't let the failure from outside of you get inside of you. 7. Say goodbye to yesterday. 8. Change yourself and your world changes. 9. Get over yourself and start giving of yourself. 10. Find the benefit in every bad experience. 11. If at first you do succeed, try something harder. 12. Learn from a bad experience and make it a good experience. Break. Do you enjoy adventure, excitement? Are you ready to embark on a life-changing experience? Check out www.stormnavigator.biz and learn how you can change your life through a revolutionary 8-day seminar. End break. Increasing your odds for success. 13. Avoid the top 10 reasons why people fail. Lord, deliver me from the man who never makes a mistake, and also from the man who makes the same mistake twice. Dr. William Mayo. I don't put much stock in the idea of luck. I think that usually things go well or not so well for people based on their actions. I believe that for the most part, you create your own luck by working hard, practicing self-discipline, remaining persistent, and making personal growth a daily priority. Add to that the blessings of a loving God, and you don't need to think about luck. However, a few years ago, I came across an article printed in the Los Angeles Times that almost made me change my mind about luck. Here's what it said. New York, jilted, hammered in a car crash and robbed. Lawrence Hanratty was named Friday the unluckiest man in New York. Nearly electrocuted in a construction site accident in 1984 that put him in a coma for weeks. Hanratty lost the lawyers fighting for his disability claim. Once was disbarred, 2 died. His wife ran off with her lawyer. Hanratty, who'd spent years fighting heart and liver disease, had his car wrecked in a crash last year. When police left the scene of the accident, he was held up and robbed. I say to myself, how much more am I going to be tested in life to see how much I can endure? Hanratty told the New York Daily newspaper in a description of more than 10 years of agony that runs under the one-page headline, "Think you got it bad, meet luckless Larry." And if he hasn't tolerated enough hardship, 38-year-old Hanratty of Mount Vernon, New York, said, an insurance company now wants to cut off his workers' compensation benefits and his landlord has threatened to kick him out of his apartment. Depressed and suffering from agoraphobia, a fear of open spaces, Hanratty uses a canister of oxygen and takes 42 pills a day for his heart and liver ailments. But with help from neighbors and a New York State Assemblyman, he is not giving up yet. "There's always hope," he said. Reading that story makes you want to find poor Lawrence to see if you can help him out in some way, doesn't it? I think the experiences of Lawrence Hanratty are not typical of most people who continually fail or experience continual or ongoing adversity. Why? Because most of the time, the trouble we face is the result of our own negative actions.